Before we start, can I just get a show of hands of how many people have actually developed for the Android platform? That's good. How many people have actually released something through the Android market? That's good. And how many people want to actually make some money? That's right. At least you guys are paying attention. The technical agenda for tonight, I'm going to discuss some of the first stumbling blocks you may come across developing applications for Android. Some of these things are only going to be brief topics, but they seem to be glossed over by many of the more technical presentations. Then I'll be talking about multiple screen resolutions. This is something we've been taking for granted at the moment, as all the Android devices that have been released are 320 by 480 in resolution. Up until last week when Dell actually released a new device in China where the resolutions were 360 by 640. So it'd be interesting to see how many people's applications will scale effectively to that screen size. I'll be doing some demonstrations just showing how easy it is to code for these and hopefully make your life easier. Then I'll be moving on to multiple language support. As you know, English isn't the only language we all speak. Android devices are being launched all over the world, and it's going to help you stand out from the crowd if your support or if your application supports multiple languages. You want to reach as many people as possible to sell your application, and targeting markets that your competitors aren't reaching out to is always going to be a bonus. Then I'm going to wrap it up with talking about user retention, things like leaderboard, social networks like Facebook, adding Twitter, doing frequent updates, and actually interacting with the users that play your games and applications. There's a good feature on the market that allows them to directly contact you, and it's very important that you actually pay attention to what these people actually say, as they're the ones that are giving you their hard-earned money. One of the first things when developing for Android that you'll come across is activities and views. These are two very similar things that are interlocked with each other, but they're vastly different. The activity controls the life cycle, the events, the intents, everything that deals with the application, whereas the view is responsible for what's actually displayed on screen. Because of these confusions, I've seen many examples where a developer will come along, maybe from a J2ME background, and they'll have a single activity across multiple views. So they'll have the entry point for the activity, and then they'll have a view for the main menu, a view for the help screen, a view for in-game. And by doing all this, they're actually taking away from some of the Android features and trying to code it themselves. The actual way we should be doing it is having a separate activity per view. So if you have a main menu, you should have an activity controlling the main menu. If you launch the help screen, you should have a separate help screen controlling that. Sorry, a separate activity controlling the help screen. When you're launching game, you should again have a separate activity controlling the game. Basically, one of the easiest examples is pressing the back key, which all Android devices have. If the user launches from the main menu into the help screen, pushing the back key will automatically cycle through the history stack and return you back to the main menu. This is just some sample code if you were to go with the confusing version of a single activity with multiple views. When the user pushes the back key, you'll have to cycle through whatever view is being displayed and try and establish where the user should return to. This is all well and good for very simple. We've only got 3 cases here, but more often than not, when you're developing for something, you never think of every single screen that is going to be in the application. And again, if we did the Android version where we have a single activity per view, we don't need any code required whatsoever. This makes our life even easier, because if we go back, just say we're in the game and we go to the help view, all of a sudden we're going to have to add extra code in to distinguish whether the user has come from the help screen or the main menu screen, and then we're going to need to return them. So we should try and avoid all of this as much as possible and let the Android engineers do all the hard work for us and make use of this feature. Another thing that even established Android developers are not aware of is the image format for the platform. 565 is the format designed for optimal performance on the device. This is a specific format designed for small screen resolutions, mobile devices, embedded Linux devices and that. And speaking to a lot of people, not many of us have actually heard about these devices or heard about this image format. It's pretty simple. There's 5 bits red, 6 bits green, 5 bits blue, which is hence 565. Roman Guy, who, if any of you guys were here at the last meetup, he actually pointed me to a filter which will plug into Photoshop for you and reduce your images specifically for you. So this will be online later, so you don't need to write down the URLs right now. Once you've actually got your images in code, the easiest way to check it is at runtime. Here's a simple method that just prints the configuration of your bitmap file. So if you're not like a lot of developers aren't graphics experts, if I request something from the artist and he gives it to me, I'm acting on good faith that he's actually given me the format I've required. With this simple bit of code, after I've loaded the bitmap, I can obtain the config of the actual bitmap file and then print out whether the artist has actually converted the image to 565. It can come up as alpha 888, RGB 888, any of the different known formats. If you have some crazy image compression format or things like that, it'll actually return null because it's not one of the known public formats for the get configuration method. You can also create RGB 565 images on the fly. If you're creating sprite sheets from if you're creating individual sprite images from a whole sprite sheet or any other number of instances, taking a camera picture or capturing it, you can create the image and just specify the config value of RGB 565, and it'll make sure your images are saved in optimal performance for the devices. From some brief tests, it does you can get anywhere from probably 10 to 15% improvement just by converting your images to the 565 format. So it's something you should make note of. Persistent data is something that a lot of our applications and games use, whether we're using it to save high scores, the user's favorite football team, the last time they played the application. A lot of people instantly go to SQLite, whether that's just well known, whether there's more articles on it. But Android actually has another little gem called shared preferences, which actually makes life a hell of a lot easier for non-critical data, whether the user has the sound turned on and off, the last time they played. If you wanted to save some more critical information or a lot of information, SQLite is still the way to go. Just got a brief bit of code here which shows how to use the shared preferences. This is an example from one of our games. The user is setting the distance, so whether it's kitten cannon, how far they've shot the kitten out of the cannon. We pass in the distance that we want to save. We initialize our shared preferences through the preference manager in our activity. And then we open an editor which allows us to actually edit the values to be saved. We pass it in the distance value, and then the most important comment is probably the commit down the bottom. If you don't call the commit command, none of the information will get saved and you'll lose it all. The second method, we actually get the distance back that the last time the user played. If they haven't played before, you'll notice in the second last line there's a second variable in the call which is 0. You can pass in the default value that you want to return. You could use -1, 99, whatever is suitable for your application. You don't always have to return 0. In this instance, it makes sense to return 0 because the user might not have played before. If you compare this to the SQLite, if any of you have worked with that, the amount of code and learning the SQL syntax, opening the cursors, closing the database, creating tables, making sure the database exists, these 7 lines of code is a hell of a lot easier than probably 30 or 40, 50 lines of code that you'll need just for some simple operations. It's also faster if speed is a consideration. This is probably the simplest thing that you can do for your application to make it stand out from the crowd. Yet whenever I download applications, probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, people have just, whether they've grabbed their old J2Me or Brew icon, they haven't followed the Google guidelines. This is actually one of the few areas where Google have provided guidelines for us how to follow, making sure our icons look like Gmail, whether they look like Maps. One of the important things is to make your application look and feel as if it's native and belongs on the phone. You can see the icon on the left is our original squashed kitten that's been shot out the cannon. And then after the graphics artist read the guide provided by Google, he's provided a 3D image which sits alongside all the other applications as if it belongs there. And to engineers, the icon's probably not a huge importance considering all the bugs and fixes that we have to do. But when other people are playing with the phones, they'll instantly be drawn to the icons that look the nicest. And whether we like it or not, people are drawn to attractive things. Just by having new people exposed to your icon, you could get extra users or new people purchasing your applications that you never may have heard of your products before. This is probably my favorite topic, or most feared, depending on who you speak to. We've been blessed at the moment that all the current devices are 320 by 480, which makes our life easier. We can hard code dimensions, we can be slack, and I'm guilty of it, everyone's guilty of it, of just getting things out the door to try and make schedules. The problem is, as we move forward, Android's open source is great in nature for allowing us to do and developers to do whatever we want, but fragmentation will start to occur. We'll have various screen resolutions released, we'll have faster and slower CPUs, we'll even have increased storage capacity as we move forward. Anyone who's used the G1 is probably sick of the 40 meg heap or the 40, I can't remember the specifics, but it's not much when you compare it to like an iPhone where there's several applications that are probably 120 meg or larger. One of the things we need to learn is we should no longer hard code coordinates in our code. We need to make it dynamic, so whether the user's playing in landscape, portrait, whether they're playing on the new Dell device that was released in China last week, that's probably 50% larger real estate. We have to make our code smarter and easier for the users. If a new phone is released and all your coordinates are hard-coded, you're going to spend a lot of tedious time recoding your application. And this is time you want to be spent building new features that actually help you sell and enhance your product to the end users. Basically, the bottom line is what we should be doing. We should be coding once and coding it correctly at the beginning. So how do we do that? I've actually got a demonstration for us. So I'm going to just demonstrate a simple border. It doesn't get any easier than this. So we've got the standard G1 phone here, emulator, which is 320 by 480, and we want to draw a simple border around the screen. It's 20 pixels, and it goes all the way around the screen. If we have a look at the code associated with that, if I can scroll down, I'll just highlight it if it makes it easier. We're drawing a static border, so we've got 4 sections to the border: the top, the bottom, and the left and the right. Here, the engineer has taken the easy route of just hard coding all the coordinates. But as soon as we change the resolution to a different format, the border no longer works. All the engineer's hard effort has gone to waste. They've got nothing to show for it. If we take the dynamic approach with our fancy blue border, if we have a look at the code, this time the engineer has been a bit smarter with it. They're actually using canvas width, canvas height, and a specified size for the border to draw their code. So if we load up the emulator again and flip the orientation, the border works as it should. Regardless, this code could be used in 5 to 10 years' time down the road, and the border is still going to be drawn exactly as the developer intended it. The easiest way to do this, if I can just find it, there's a method called surface changed, which gets reported once the view is created. This method, if you're using a surface view, will give you the width and height of your new view as well as the format that you've specified. So this helps you that at runtime you can decide what resolution the screen is, how you're going to adapt to it, and so forth. If you're using a standard view, there's also a method called onSize change, which gives you the new width and height as well as the old width and height. So you can easily detect if they've flipped from landscape to portrait, portrait to landscape, and vice versa. That's my code. Just say, last week Dell released a new device which was 360 by 640. None of us in the room have access to this device, so how are we actually going to test against it? With 1.5, the engineering team at Google released this new product called AVDs, or Android Virtual Device. If you have a look on your laptop and navigate to your SDK directory, platforms, Android 1.5, skins, you'll see a list of emulated devices. There's HVGA Landscape, HVGA Portrait, and there's a couple of other random resolutions that you can actually test it against. The important feature is inside here we can actually create our own emulated devices. So we can create 1020 by 600 devices, we can create anything. We can give them camera resolution, we can define the RAM, we can define the speed of the CPU. Anything we want to test against, we can actually create an emulator for and do testing against. The most important feature is probably the multiple resolutions. If I've got I've actually created one. I'll close this. So this is based on the new Dell device. Hopefully the resolution isn't larger than the projector. Just any of you that have used the emulator will realize how long it takes to start up. If we go back to our fabulous red border we had earlier, again you'll see because the developers hard-coded it, it's not working correctly. If we flip over to our dynamic border, even though the resolution's 50% larger, the border's still being drawn correctly and it achieves our results. There's been a lot of noise recently whether as developers, if we should support landscape and portrait at the same time. Of course, the marketing and product folks will always come to you and say we need both resolutions supported. Whether it's good or not, doesn't matter how difficult it is, it's the latest craze that everyone's supporting. I'm actually totally against this method simply because some applications are more suited to landscape and some applications give a better experience in portrait mode. Again, it's completely up to each individual application whether you should do portrait or landscape. However, your time is actually better spent on coding for multiple resolutions instead of worrying about the orientation. As we saw with the dynamic borders, if you code with multiple resolutions in mind, it doesn't matter whether the user's landscape, portrait or anything like that. Your code is simply going to work. And this is a lot more effective way to spend your time programming. Historically, the mobile applications have all been in portrait mode simply because there's been a keypad under the device. However, with things like the iPhone, the T-Mobile, My Touch 3G devices that are coming out without keyboards, landscape mode is actually starting to make a comeback. Just when you're starting a project, or you might even be working on a project now, decide what orientation best suits your application and just stick with it. If you can do both, it's a bonus, but at this point in time, it's not a requirement. Just spend your time focusing on multiple resolutions instead of whether the user's landscape, portrait, playing upside down, or anything like that. In the end, it doesn't matter. The next topic is multiple language support. This is probably been slightly neglected simply because by nature we only work with what we're happy with, and I feel comfortable working with English. If I was working with French or German, I'd probably be a bit out of context. However, Android devices are going to be released all over the world, and we need to support as many of these countries' languages as possible. If I've developed an app and my friend has developed an app and I support Chinese, French, German, and his doesn't, even though we're exactly the same, I only get more market penetration by nature, which will also help me get more downloads and hopefully more ratings in the Android market. Over a period of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, eventually my application is going to rise higher up the charts than his, simply because I've given more people a chance to download and use my application. Android market actually, if you're not going to translate your whole application, Android market actually gives you an option to just upload descriptions for varying languages. I've taken a screenshot. Hopefully it comes out okay. This is actually for Kitten Cannon, one of the games we've released on the market. For any of you that have market accounts, you simply log into the back end and you can update your application settings. There's a little option up the top which most people probably don't notice, is the add language, which pops up this drop-down bar. And all you have to do is simply type in your description down the bottom and specify what languages you want your description translated in for. So if you don't have a translation for Japanese, it's going to default back to the English version. But whether you know anyone, any French people or German people that could translate your application for you, could go onto forums and do maybe translation swaps with other people. There's plenty of methods out there to get your descriptions translated. And this is the first step that people from foreign countries are going to see. When they're on the device looking at applications in the market, they're naturally going to be drawn to descriptions that are in their native language, just because they feel like they're being targeted by the user instead of having English forced upon them, which seems like 90% of the applications actually do. Again, having multiple language support, you're going to get higher ratings in the market, more downloads, and just boost your sales, which is what we all want in the end. Supporting multiple languages is not always the easiest thing to do. There's a few common mistakes that are made, whether it's in the engineering, the design, or the art department. Here we have an example where the text has been directly drawn onto the buttons for Kitten Cannon. This is something you should absolutely never ever do. If we wanted to translate Kitten Cannon into French, the artist is going to have to go back, redraw the buttons with the new French translation, and there's 5 buttons just for French. If we're going to do German, he has to do another 5 buttons. If we're going to do Japanese, he's going to have to do another 5 buttons. There's got to be a much easier way to do this. Thankfully there is. Android gives us support for true type fonts. Your artist might already be using this when he's creating the images. He just simply types in on his computer what he wants drawn on the button, and then he sends you the images as if he's created something magical. The ideal way to support this is to create some blank buttons. So we'd want our start button with no text on it, the high scores with no text on it. And then he'd provide you with the true type font that he's using in his graphics program to do the text. Once we have this true type font, we can load it in our code and actually display it on any of our widgets, whether it's buttons, text views, edit views, radio buttons, anything that Android uses, we can set the typeface to. So here's a sample code, and it shows you it's only 3 lines of code to load a custom font onto the device. We have an object called a typeface, and then from the important thing is we have to load our font into the assets directory. Inside your Android project, you've probably put a lot of your resources in the res directory under drawable or the strings under values. If you shift up to the top level of your project where you have the source and the bin, there's actually an assets directory, and this is where you can put things like sounds and true type fonts in this case. Once we've loaded our font, it's simply a matter of obtaining our button and setting the typeface or edit text or whatever you want to load your custom fonts with. The end result is we would have our main menu, and when the user changes their locale setting, we'd be displaying the French version of start, the Japanese version of start, whatever locale setting the user actually uses. How many people have come across something where there's been strings hard-coded into the code? We've seen it all the time, and I can see quite a few people smiling. If everyone spoke English, there'd probably still be issues, but there wouldn't be as many issues. If I came across this code and someone asked me to translate it into 5 different languages, I'm going to be stuck. It's like, what the hell was this person thinking when he did it? But just by natural default, we all think everyone speaks English, and it's just easy with us to deal with English only. Thankfully, Android provides us with an easy way to do multiple languages. That screenshot's no good, so let me just open my project. In the resources directory, you'll see any of you that have used Android before will be familiar with the strings. This is where you put your application name for the hello world and so forth. If you want to support multiple languages, you can create these extra directories, so values-es for Spanish, -fr for French, -g for German. There's actually a whole list of the international Unicodes for each particular country on the Android documentation. The feature with this is, let me just get back. just going to show a quick example of it in action. So this is hello. Everyone knows hello in English. However, if the user was using a different language, settings, just say the person happened to be using Spanish. If we flip back to our application, it's going to be in Spanish. And we can simply do this by altering the strings XML. So if I have a look at the strings XML, my computer's having a hard day. We can see in the default directory under values, we've got hello. So if the user is using any language we don't have specified, they're going to get hello. However, we can also specify. We go into the strings XML for Spanish, and then that's what they're going to display. And we can simply create extra directories. Let's see if this works. New file. I can't remember what French is, so luckily I cheated. You didn't. So now we've got our French version of hello. We can simply recompile. And this is going to test me because I don't know how to change the settings in Spanish. If anyone speaks Spanish, feel free to.
It's the bottom one.
Oh, okay. This one?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Look at that. I've already made some people happy. French. Oh, where's just French France? All right, so we go back into our application, and now it's going to say bonjour. It just shows how easy it is to support multiple languages just by translating your strings XML. Again, if you had to do this on other platforms with your code, it would probably take a lot longer than 5 minutes that it takes to translate. This is something that all Android engineers should be aware of. So basically, Android does all the hard work for us. Once we provide the strings XML and the appropriate directories, Android will load the appropriate file based on the user's locale settings. We don't even need a single line of code to support any languages that we want. Now that the users have our application installed, the hardest step is actually keeping them playing the game. We want to obviously keep them past the initial 24-hour period, which is when the refund expires, but we also want to keep them happy and make them come back to our game, as well as recommend to their friends that they're playing cool games or they've found some application that's made their life easier. There's various options that we can do this. We can use leaderboards, social networks are starting to emerge, Facebook, Twitter, and we can also do updates. Again, users might contact us and say, hey, this is a cool feature, could you put this in? I've found a bug on this particular screen. By producing updates and making the users feel like they've contributed to your application, they're going to give you a higher rating and also more likely to give you favourable comment in the market, which is what we all need. Leaderboards are actually possibly the first form of social interaction. If any of you remember when arcades were popular, you used to be able to enter your three initials and obtain a high score on the machine. Games like NBA Jam even took it further, and you could create a profile, track your win-loss record, and you had a bit of pride on that particular machine trying to improve your ratings. Another thing with leaderboards is it brings out our competitive nature. How many times have you come back to an application because your friend beat your score, you want to beat their score, you're playing a car game, you want to reduce your fastest lap time? A lot of us are competitive by nature, and it's what brings us back to playing games. It also makes us very vain because we feel like we're better than someone else simply because we've beat their high score. By tapping into this natural human nature, we can keep people coming back and playing our games over and over again. One thing with the leaderboards is that you have to keep it very simple. With NBA Jam, it was a win-loss record. You could have a poker game which tracks how much money people have won, and you could go to the extremes like how many hands they've played, how many tournaments they're entered, how often they fold. But the users are just going to get lost. In poker, at the end of the day, whoever has the most chips is king, so just keep your leaderboard based around the number of chips that they've won in tournament play. Sorry, I didn't even notice that bit. If some games, the all-time high scores are very difficult to achieve, and once people load up your game and play it and see, oh, I scored 100, the all-time score is 1,000,000, often they can get disheartened. By breaking it down over a time period, like daily high scores, monthly high scores, users don't feel as out of touch. It's like when you jump in, just say you're playing Counter-Strike and you jump in, you've never played before, you get shot in the first 30 seconds. Or 5 seconds. It's not very fun. You want the people to feel like they actually have a chance of competing and a chance of rising to the top. So by breaking down the high scores over time, it makes it much easier. At the moment, the most popular two forms of leaderboards are points-based and time-based. If your game doesn't fit into either of those two genres, you can always come up with some unique way to keep the users entertained. The most popular genre at the moment is probably tower defense game. I haven't seen too many variations in the leaderboard theme for tower defense, but they could possibly they could track how far each enemy's moved before they've been destroyed, and at the end of the level, calculate based on all the enemies' distances how far or how the small amount of distance that the enemies are covered. Whatever person has the least amount of distance covered is obviously better at that level, and it just gives the users a unique way to interact. Social networks is something that's come around very recently. Whether you agree with them personally or whether you use them, it's important that your businesses are aware of them and actually start to try and increase your presence. At the moment, they're free for now, and they can reach hundreds of millions of users. Setting up a Facebook account or a Twitter account is only going to take you 10-15 minutes, but it just gives you another avenue to reach out to more users that they might be interested in your products, but they don't have an Android device. By tapping into separate avenues, you're just giving them a new way to reach out to them. And the next time they go and purchase a phone, they might be inclined to swing one way or another, purely based on their interaction with you. At the moment, Facebook's possibly the most popular social network on the web today, with over 250 million users. They also provide a very unique platform that allows you to integrate with users' accounts. You can get their friends, their online status, you can post messages to their wall. Anything the user can do from the web interface, you can do from inside your games. The problem with this is, because it's so in-depth, it can be very intimidating to first-time developers. If you happen to set up an application, one of the things you should definitely do is set up a fan page. It gives you an avenue to post videos, screenshots, and just interact with people who are using your application. For any of you that use Facebook, you'd understand that the wall feature is very popular. You can post comments, talk, follow links. It just gives you another way to understand what your users want and what they actually enjoy in your game. The Stream API is a new beta function provided by Facebook that allows you to post messages. There was a wall post method earlier, but they've been updated with the Stream API, which actually gives you more flexibility. You can also get useful analytics based on users posting to Facebook, who's using your application, how often they come back, how long they're logged on. These sort of things will help you find out if they're using the leaderboard feature, are they posting messages to Facebook, all kinds of things that help you tailor and improve your application. The only issue with Facebook at the moment is there's no official Android API. Unlike iPhone, who get Facebook Connect, the Android developers are left with nothing. Thankfully, Silbeck, and I'm sorry if I haven't pronounced your name properly, has created a project with some sample code which takes you through all the steps to actually get a Facebook user registered, posting messages to their wall, changing their status. Again, this will be online, so you can grab the URL later. Twitter is probably the fastest growing social network on the web at the moment, with an estimated over 5 million users. It is very easy to integrate with your application after dealing with Facebook. One thing you have to be aware of, though, is that there's a 140 character tweet limit. Thankfully, the API that the Twitter folk have provided is actually very simple. Whether that's just because their platform is simpler than Facebook or not, if you're going to think about doing some sort of social interaction, I'd suggest doing Twitter first, because you could probably put it into your application in 30-40 minutes and actually test it, release it, see if users are using it. If they find it useful, you can always move on to spending a few days to implement Facebook and expanding your social network awareness from there. Another item that you can do to reach more people is cross-selling between your own applications. If you have multiple applications available in the market, you need to let the users know about it. If they've purchased one application from you and they like it, they're more inclined to purchase other applications from you. Once you gain the trust of once you gain the users' trust, it's very valuable, and you've got to keep them happy. So how can we actually do this? The simplest way is to have a button on your main menu which you link to a predefined Android query. Here we have down here, we have an intent which is launching the market. We're going to view the Android market and we're passing it a search parameter. At hands-on, all our Java packages are under com.handson. By launching this search query, I'll get a display of all the applications that are available at the moment. So one thing to make sure is when you're actually releasing applications, you always give them the same package. Otherwise, you won't be able to query and show everyone what releases you've actually made. So this is very important. We've noticed that when for example, Guitar Hero was released and then maybe a month or two later, the sales are declining, we released Kitten Cannon. Simply by having the More Games feature, anyone who's enjoyed Kitten Cannon is going to go and test out Guitar Hero. They might even test out Astrology Zone. So it just helps bring up awareness every so often when you release a new product that you actually have new games developed. David and John are going to touch on this in more detail, but I just want to go over it briefly from a developer perspective. If you're an independent developer, usually you don't have any marketing budget or anything like that. So how do we go about contacting and let people know that we've released applications? The easiest way is to just send emails to all the review sites. Not all of them will get back to you because they seem to ignore you, whatever it is they do. They're obviously quite busy, so they can't reply to everyone. But at least one or two of them will actually get back to you and will be interested in featuring your applications. It also helps you get feedback from people who have played many Android applications, and they can often give you some improvements that you should make to your games and applications. Another thing you can do is post a YouTube video. All you need is a simple camera that you can hold steady while someone else plays your game. This goes a long way to actually obtaining new audience. With the limited Android market as it is at the moment, anything you can do to generate more awareness, whether it's screenshots, videos, or anything like that, is going to give you the edge so people actually know what your product is about. Again, there's a few custom marketplaces that have started to pop up recently that actually allow you to register as a developer, and you can associate screenshots with your applications. Again, this is on a application by application basis, so every app that you've released you need to log in again and release more screenshots. I'm not actually sure about the visibility that these marketplaces have had, but anything that you can do to help get your app out there is going to be a benefit. And the last one is signing up to Android-specific user forums. There's a lot of forums out there where people download applications and they post reviews, give feedback. They even have ideas for new applications. So if you're struggling for new ideas or features, the forums are places to check out. These are the end users that are using your product, and often they come up with brilliant ideas that you never even thought of, even the simplest ideas that can make their life easier. This is one thing I want to touch on. For those of you that weren't at Google I/O, the Google team have done a brilliant effort of actually putting all the talks online. The URL's at the bottom. Two of the talks that don't get as much coverage as Developing Real-Time Games by Chris Pruitt and the Android Media Framework by David Sparks. If you haven't watched them or any of the others, I highly suggest you sit down. Each talk's probably about an hour and a half, and they do get quite technical, but the amount of content that they give you and the things you can take away from it are immense. So thank you for listening. The few things I just wanted to remind you about is read the SDK documentation. You'll find things like shared preferences instead of using MySQL. There's lots of little gems that you'll only get by reading through the documentation. Visit the official Android website at developer.android.com. There's tutorials, blog posts on how to do things. There's a wealth of information available there that you should check out. Make sure you test on real hardware before you release. The emulator will only get you so far, but you really need to test on the device. Some devices, even though they're They're meant to be the same as the emulator. You might find specific quirks. One thing I've noticed recently is relative layout does not quite work on the emulator in the same behavior that it has on the phone. So if you're using relative layouts, make sure you test it on a phone. The most important thing is probably code with multiple resolutions in mind. You want to make your life as easy as possible when these 20, 30, 40, 50, 200 Android handsets start to come out over the next 6 to 12 months. By coding it correctly to begin with, you can sit back and relax while everyone else is scrambling till 2 o'clock in the morning, making sure their code works on some random handset that's been released. And lastly, make sure you interact with your users. These people aren't stupid, and they've spent hard money on your applications. Make sure you listen to them, take in their ideas, get back to them. I've actually tried to I've downloaded random applications, and I've sent an email to the developer through the Android market, and they've never got back to me. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm not going to give this person a positive review if they can't answer my simple question or at least acknowledge that I've tried to contact them to make their application better. So just into anyone that gives you an email, whether sometimes you get some crazy ideas coming through from people, just at least acknowledge that they've contacted you and say, I'll put that on my to-do list. It might take me a while to implement, but at least get back to them and let them know that you're actually sitting there and listening to what these people have to say. Thank you for that. I will now hand you over to John and David, who will discuss product and marketing. Oh yeah, sorry. Sorry, is there any questions or... Okay, so the question is, with the assets, the images and so forth, how do you actually target a large number of devices? This is something we've been discussing because Android devices are only starting to come out in multiple resolutions. Like with the resources, the multiple language example, how I did different strings for ES and France, Android actually provides a mechanism where you can define specific resolutions. So you could put maybe a 320 by 480, and you could put like an 800 by 600 image in. You don't need every single resolution. You can maybe pick 2 or 3 resolutions, and Android will pick the most appropriate one, and it'll actually scale the images down for you. So if you have a larger image than 320 by 480, I believe it'll take the next step up and scale it down so then the images aren't pixelated. The negative effect of that is that your builds are possibly going to be maybe 2 or 3 times larger simply because they have so many assets. The only way around that would be to actually have the images stored on a server somewhere and download the images at runtime and save the songs. This is something we did with Guitar Hero, and that's one of the complaints from the users actually. All the songs are in MP3 format, and if we were to put them all in the build at runtime, the builds would be too large for them to install on the G1. So what we actually do is we download the song and we store it on the SD card, so when they come back in the future, they can actually just load it straight off the SD card. So the question is about outreach, if we've tried different methods to generate sales and so forth. Android's been such a new platform that it's still very early and the number of users is quite limited. So I think platforms like iPhone give you a better understanding that maybe release it for the first month for free just to get the number of users. When someone has a free application, I guess their expectation is lower, so they're more likely to give you a favourable review than whether you charge 99 cents, $1.99. As soon as you put a price with it, they seem to associate a certain value and their expectations increase. So I think the initial maybe half price, free, or also even if you have a paid application, just release a demo version as well. So then you can give users a taste of what the application's like before they purchase it. Okay, that's good. I think we have 4 or 5 applications at the moment, and they vary. Kitten cannon, which is very simple, shooting a kitten out of a cannon, making sure it doesn't die on spikes. That probably took about maybe 3 weeks to develop. Guitar Hero, on the other hand, which was like the first multiplayer connected game and everything, that may have taken probably 3 or 4 months to develop. But also that was our first Android application, so things that we've learnt since then, we could probably come back and do it a lot quicker. Yeah. So a lot of the experience that we've taken from producing applications we can use to make our engineering cycle shorter. So the question was in regards to the 565 format, how we measured performance and how we actually noticed the difference. So with the 565s, I got corresponding images, one that might have been in 8-bit 3 channels and then a 565, and I just drew a series of animations on the screen, and then I just measured the frames per second. And then also the 565 images don't have an alpha component, so that also helps the graphics to speed up. And the actual display, the native display on the G1, is formatted for 565. It's a specific format designed for mobile devices. And if you have a look in the SDK itself, like at some of the images, you'll notice that a majority of them are actually 565. And I only knew about it when I was speaking to Roman Guy, and he actually mentioned that the images should be in that specific format. And that could change going forward as new device manufacturers release handsets, but all the HTC models are at least 565 format. The question is, once the images you put in the resource directory actually get repackaged into the final APK. I haven't looked too much into that, but I do realize that once they get packaged, Android seems to have its own compression format when it builds the APK. So I've heard reports where the size has been reduced, but there's also been reports where people have their own custom formats and the size has been increased. So it's up to individual applications to go from there. But hopefully, as new Android devices are released with more storage space, those sort of concerns will be very minimal.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is John Joseph. I'm a product manager at Hands On Mobile. If you have any questions throughout what I'm saying, I'm a product guy, interact with me, ask me questions, call me a liar. It's not going to hurt my feelings. I've been doing mobile for since 2002, and I distinctly remember it was before interoperability of SMS in the US. I've done everything from pure text messaging based applications, both here and internationally, wallpapers, ringtones, other applications, business applications, and now games and other entertainment type of apps. So I've been in the space for a while. We're very excited about Android, and what we're here to talk to you about is sort of the flip side of what Jason was talking about, which is what does it take to make a good app and make it great. So I'm going to be talking from a product perspective again, and well, here we go. Okay, so I think planning your app is something that is critically important. A lot of independent developers have different styles of working, and the style of working, whether it's agile or waterfall, I think is less important than knowing what it is you're building. Some of the things that go into planning your app, fancy app, I'm breaking. Well, what's the point of your app? And what I mean is it a very specific task-oriented application? Is it a casual game that's intended to last for 5 minutes? Is it something for 30 minutes? Is it something that you want people to use repeatedly, day in and day out? Really thinking through what this is that you're trying to build is, as early as possible, is important. And I think it's very important to actually go through the act of writing down a summary of what it is you're building. If you have a written description of what this app is, if you're working independently, and I'm curious, how many people are working independently building an Android app? And how many people are working with or collaborating with a small team of people? Okay. And how about larger organizations, companies? Okay. Well, I think having a written description, especially when you're working with a small team, is pretty important, because if you can see it in black and white, this is what we're trying to build. You can't argue about perception of what it was later, because it's there and you've agreed to it. I'm not talking about a Bible of what this application is. It doesn't have to be hundreds of pages. It can be 3 or 4 sentences just to get the spirit of what you're building across. The other really important question is, who is the user? The more you know about who you're building for, the better a chance you have of building something that they actually want. And also remember that your app is not going to be for everyone. Saying that your app is for everyone from 7 to 75 who has an Android device means you don't really know who your app is going to be used by. So okay, how do you get people? So now you know what your app is, you know who your app is for. How do you get people to use your app? I'm a big believer that it's really the details. Functionality is great. I think Google and Android have done a very good job of opening up a mobile platform, allowing developers to be creative, opening up mobile devices much more than they have ever been opened before. But the details are important. When I say details, things like the audio track, whether there's music involved, the sound effects of different actions, the graphics and the animations, all these things. The user interface map is actually critically important as well. All these things require some thought. You don't necessarily have to have it all done and know exactly what it's going to be, but you have to think about it. You have to be aware that the sound effects is not just something you realize after you finish what you think is your final build. You start playing it and someone says, hey, there's no sound. And you go, oh crap, I got to go download some waves and convert them or something. Make your game or your application a pleasure to look at and to use. If it's pretty, and I know Jason alluded to it earlier, the end user is not going to care how good your game is if they don't think it looks good. It may be functionally and that's not true for all things. There's definitely some very niche products that the functionality is more important than the appearance, but the user experience still has to be very good. One thing that is, it's a strength and a weakness is the, minimum set of standards on Android. You don't know what it is people are going to be looking for, what they are expecting. So you're free to do what you want, but you have to really think about that because it could be anything. How many people have developed for mobile before, specifically? And how many people this is the first time they're developing for mobile? Okay, so for you guys, the thing to really keep at the front of your mind is context. You have to remember that this is not just a little computer. It's a mobile device. And what that means is, you have to think about a lot of different things. How a user is interacting with this device is really going to depend on what their environment is. If it's too sunny and there's a glare in their eyes or glare on the screen, they're not going to have enough time to react to things the same way as they would if they were just really focused and intently looking at your application. All right. Oh, that's the wrong direction. Okay, so the other thing to think about is, well, why your app? Look at the competition. Look who else is out there. Look who else is doing similar things or things that could be done instead of your app. So it's not just, a Guitar Hero versus a Tapulous application, if you're thinking about, that style of app, but any other game or any other application that takes up that sort of mind share, that amount of time in an end user's brain. And just be prepared to sort of be thinking about that and how you can combat that by making your application that much better. So where do applications typically fall down? Choice is a big one. I think the idea, the concept that you let your user decide, should I make this border blue or red? Well, let the user decide. It's their phone, let them pick. On a mobile device, that just doesn't work. You have to make good decisions rather than giving too many options. If you don't make the right decision and the right amount of decisions, you're just going to overwhelm the user who's trying to figure out, what the purpose of your application is, and then how, on top of the controls for the actual game or the application, the controls of how it looks and how it feels, which is fine for an advanced user. You don't have hours or even tens of minutes on a mobile device. You have minutes or seconds to get people to understand. Feature creep. I'm a product guy, so clearly I'm the cause of this often. So as a product guy, I tend to ask for more features. I want more features crammed in there. Things change. We want more into this application. I think independent developers are equally guilty of this, but from a different way. They just want that one more cool thing or that thing that they think is going to make it a little bit better. But you have to really remember to balance these interesting new features with the difficulty to integrate it with whatever it is you're building and integrate it in the right way, not just bolting it on at the last minute and adding another button. That goes back to that user interface map I mentioned earlier. It has to be integrated into the application in a smart and well thought out way. And also the complexity for the users. I've seen a user interface map go from a play button, options, and high scores to having 4 different options for sound attached right on the main menu. You could choose this type of music you wanted, the volume level, and it was just a Frankenstein's monster of submenus right on the main menu screen. And that's going to overwhelm users, and they're not going to be very interested in playing that game. The learning curve. Pick up and play. That's the one thing. If you take anything away, take away pick up and play. You want people to be able to download your application, launch it, and get value out of it within seconds. You don't want them to have to sit through 1 to 5 minutes of a tutorial or any sort of learning how to use this application before they can actually use it. You want to get them in quickly, get them happy about it, and any confusion is going to ruin their experience. And if their experience is ruined, they're going to give you bad reviews, they're going to delete your app, they're probably going to get a refund, and that's a lose-lose for everyone, especially if your app is good. So I guess to summarize, think about how your user is going to be using the app. Mechanics. So there are certain established mechanics for different kinds of games. Depending on the form factor of the device, depending on if it's touchscreen versus D-pad, don't mess with these. Like, not to say you couldn't, and if you can come up with something that's brilliant, everyone's going to get right away, all power to you. But if you think it's a little bit, I guess an example would be, I don't think a accelerometer interface on a chess game is going to work unless it was to knock over the board and start again. Maybe. Don't make users learn how to use your game, which is different, or your app, which is vastly different than something that may already be in their mind. It's a lot harder to teach them something new than it is to just get them to do something that they're already used to. So, Android challenges today. What do we have here? Much smaller audience. So compared to some other open platforms that are new, iPhone being the big one, but there's others. BlackBerry's opening up. Verizon just launched their new initiatives. The Android audience is quite small, and this comes out of an AdMob report that I actually saw today. 3 million users is the estimated number of Android users today, as compared to about 40 million for the iDevice category. That's a challenge. That means you have much fewer users who are looking at your applications. You have a vocal minority, potentially, who could just tank your application because they, people like Jason who don't get a response just say, oh, this guy didn't respond to me, I'm going to, say bad things. Or, there's, griefers or just people who have different opinions of, or have a louder voice in the smaller community. The G1, great device, brand new, opening up a whole new area for developers and showing competition for iPhone in particular. The quality just wasn't there. I mean, in my opinion, the touchscreen wasn't that good. The response time was slow. And some people saw that and took that as the benchmark. That was not an instance of a particular device. That was the example of Android. I've seen devices that are not released yet, probably prototypes for the next year or so, and the devices are getting a lot better. There's no question about it that they are on par or superior to other devices that are out there today. But this perception is something that's going to have to be battled. The Android market. Let's see. Well, I mean, I'm not going to read the bullets. I think some of the biggest challenges is one of the biggest challenges is the limited purchasing methods. Right now, it's very difficult to purchase something unless you put in your credit card. The user is made to jump through hoops. That's getting better. That's going away. But there are challenges to the market that you're all going to be facing when you launch your applications. Some of these can be battled through other methods. And the Android users being reluctant to download paid apps. This is another thing, again, from the AdMob presentation. 19% of users who purchased, Android users purchase one paid app per month. That's very low relative to other platforms. I don't think this is going to be the case long term. I think as the user base grows, as more devices come out there, you're going to see this increase, and you're going to see a very active user community, but that is there today. Device fragmentation, this is something that Jason touched on as well. This is a old school mobile problem. 5 years ago, you had, and you still have 400 devices, 4 or 5 carriers worldwide, dozens or hundreds of carriers, different form factors, different OEMs. It's a big problem. That's going to be happening again regardless. Now, if you build your code right, like Jason showed some examples of, this problem can be minimized, but you have to be vigilant when you're coding and not take the easy shortcuts to get something out the door quickly. I really encourage you to take the extra time to build it right the first time so that you don't have to face these problems, which traditionally have been horrible problems for carriers or for mobile people. Because multiple builds is really the people who are going to have to pay the price of that bad code is you. You're going to have to build to support multiple devices, and that's not going to happen that far in the future. It's 6 to 12 months from now. So let's see. Yeah, and a lot of things I've seen is the interfaces, the design of the applications, The things that you're putting out there are really great. The users just haven't caught up yet. And you got to really think about who that user is. This goes back right to the beginning. Who is your end user? And build something for them. And then incrementally make it better. But if you change things too much, too fast for them, they're not going to get it. They're going to be overwhelmed, and they're not going to see, the brilliance of what you've been building. So, the other problem that's on this slide here is with the Android market is the limited off-device discovery. It's really hard to look at devices in a consolidated place if you're not looking at your device. There's no equivalent of the iTunes or App Store. You can see, top featured apps, but there's not a lot that's out there. So that's a limitation that you're going to have to combat with other marketing efforts. All right, so from a product point of view, some key elements that I think you should try to include: feedback to the user. And this is very general. This is there's different kinds of feedback. There's in-app feedback to input that they're giving you. Make sure that you give them, whether it's a visual feedback, whether it's a vibration or a sound. Make sure that the user knows that their app is working with them or working for them. Also, when a user emails you or sends you a note or comments on something, either complaining about a feature or praising a feature or praising an application is less common than complaining about it. Listen to the complaints, fix them, and if you can, send that user a note saying that you've taken care of it, and hopefully that will satisfy people who actually have real problems and are not just trying to complain for the sake of complaining. Controls need to feel natural. Don't make the user hold things the wrong way. If you have an accelerometer-based game, which is a ring toss game, if you're from a park, make sure the orientation of the phone is the right way. You don't want to hold it landscape if you're trying to throw it forward. But if you're trying to throw it as a frisbee, you want to hold it think about things like that. Make sure the controls for the game feel natural. A first-person shooter that had multiple thumb controls is probably better than using a D-pad, I'm thinking. But make sure the controls for your app fits your app and fits the device. Take advantage of the new device that come out there. Take advantage of the keyboard when it makes sense or whatever is specific to that device. And think about that and think about what kinds of, look at other devices that are non-Android devices. Think of the great things about those devices and expect that those controls will eventually be in an Android device somewhere. And if you can, code so that you could expand how the user interacts with your application. Community. So Jason touched on this as well. The Facebook, Twitter, leaderboards, all these are elements of community that make users more engaged, make them feel like they're part of something bigger. It gives them a sense of really interacting with not only the application or you, but with other members of other fans of that application. And that's pretty important these days. I'm now going to pass it over to David, who's the Director of Marketing for Hands-On, and let him do talk. Anybody have any questions? No one really interrupted me. I think it's both. I think the fact that the current Android user is there's just so they're early adopters still. So early adopters are a particular type of person, particular type of personality. So they may be more interested in the open market, and it should be free. They expect it to be free, or they can build it themselves. For not everyone, but for a number of people. I think that the market is going to mature as new devices are released and more, sexier devices get launched. I think Android is going to catch up. I think you're going to see less people. I think we're going to see the same thing that has happened with iPhone happen with Android from a consumer point of view, where it becomes more of a consumer, more consumer-targeted devices that are widely adopted. You're going to see the same sorts of things happening with reviews. Early on in the iPhone days, you could launch an application in basically a beta or pre-beta form, have the users interact with you, tell you what's wrong with it, find bugs, you fix it, and they're very happy. Today, that's not so much the case. People are expecting polished applications in the App Store. I think that same thing's going to happen in Android, where today you can get away with launching something early, getting people to give you feedback and fixing it. I think a year from now, that's not going to be the case. You're going to have a much more polished application that you launch. Hands-on, we don't focus on one or the other or just those two. We definitely support, the big chunk of our business really comes from feature phones. And that is still a huge part of the market, which is an area that is very hard for an independent developer to get into. The BlackBerry market, the BlackBerry App Store, I think, is interesting. I don't think they've executed well enough. And I haven't seen a huge number of applications on there. Palm is still, I think it's still too early to tell. Just it's the single device. They're trying to get that device out there. It hasn't met expectations. So I'm not sure about how that's going to go. Yeah, so the question is, do I think Google will change, or Android will change the marketplace to incorporate more selling features, so screenshots or videos or other types of information that help you sell your application, or if not, how do we cope with that? So for the first part, I hope they do. I have no insight into what they're doing or what they're thinking, but I really think that it's important for users to have a place to go to get previews of applications. Now, the fact that they have this return policy is very helpful from a user point of view. I can buy something, play it for 24 hours, and then return it, and I've lost nothing. From a developer community point of view, that's actually pretty horrible, because you could build something, someone could play it, finish playing it within 24 hours, and you got no money. From how to combat the issue of what a user could see in that app store, I think it's really about the other marketing activities that you can do around, whether it's things like the YouTube videos or videos you can create, to any other external buzz that you can create, which Dave is definitely going to be diving into a bit more. I think those external activities are actually pretty important. And it's also an area that I think, so one thing I didn't get into, my background is actually more technical than product. I sort of got into, I don't even know how I got into product actually, just started doing it one day and people told me to keep doing it. But I remember years ago when I was definitely more on the developer side of things, I used to think, well, marketing, well, that's just, logos and, fancy words, that's easy. Well, I've come to learn it's actually not easy. There's a whole slew of things that go into it that I never really considered that difficult until I tried to do them. And then I realized I'm not good at that, and I need people like David to actually do that because I can't. So finding someone to work with you could potentially be something that might be very useful, just to get someone who has that marketing expertise that can help you sort of figure out how to position this, how to talk about it, where to talk about it, and help build that buzz. So that might be something to consider. So the question was, based on my experience in the industry, have I ever, and the, I guess, consistent theme that Jason and I both talked about regarding building for specific devices, have I ever worked with a company, Device Anywhere? So the answer is I have not personally worked with them. I know people that have and have had good experiences with them, but I have no direct experience with them. So the question is, do I think the feedback that you can get from the Android market is as valuable or more valuable than on the iTunes App Store? And should you launch an app to get that feedback so that you could then expand it to other markets? I think, yes, it is very valuable. I think the expansion to other markets is something that's non-trivial. So it's something to really think about. So the follow-up was, which users are more helpful in feedback? Is it iPhone users or Android users? It's hard to say. I think early on, iPhone users were much more vocal than they are today. I think today it's more...
Expect the polish.
Yeah, they expect the $8 game to be a full 40-hour gameplay, large publisher experience. So I think Android feedback from you, but you still get users who can give you really good targeted feedback. It's really a matter of, but when you have that volume of users and applications, it's really a matter of filtering, like cutting through all the noise and getting the really valuable, which if you have the time to do it, you should, even no matter how much it is, how many reviews you get or how many messages you get. But when you have that number of users, it gets more difficult. So given the target market of Android users and the current state of the market, you're probably going to get more pointed and people expecting more of a response from Android developers, I think, today. But again, I don't know how long that's going to last, and I'm not discounting the input of iPhone users. I think that's also very valuable. The question is, what is our integration with SMS payment systems, and what was the other part? And what's the relationship even outside of both in the U.S. and outside the U.S., and what's the relationship typically like, and the split on that? So I have done a lot of SMS in the past, premium SMS in the past. Typically, you have to work with an aggregator. Typically, there's a per message payment to the aggregator. There's a 50-50 revenue share with the carrier. So you end up with a very small piece of it. And if you have any brand licensor that you're working with, they get a piece of it as well. it ends up being a lot of work and very minimal returns unless you're really close to the carrier. And if you can get away with it, it's just you and the carrier, you get half the money basically. But it rarely works out that way. You're also very limited in the user experience with SMS. You have to, in the US, you have double opt-in. You have different carriers have different methods and different integration on the back end. So it's very complicated. So that's why these open networks like Android, like iPhone, that allow billing directly to customers, which Android is going to be having a better way of doing, I think, in the near future, is much better from a developer point of view because you don't have to worry about someone else taking half your money.
My name is David McCammon. Some of you I know. Nice seeing familiar faces. I've been at Hands on Mobile for over 4 years now, heading up the marketing department for all platforms. And it's definitely a challenging space. I would say it's probably one of the hardest things to market are mobile applications, especially with fragmentation, trying to reach end users, and because there's such a vast number of phones and mobile devices out there, that it just amazes me that you can actually reach someone with a product and they can actually come and find your product and buy it without getting sidetracked through various steps or finding someone else's product. That's much cooler. So how many people here are actively marketing their Android app? 2? Got 2 people? 3. Tom, very good. How many people would like to but just don't have the money or the time or resources? A couple? Okay. Good. Well, I just want to talk a little bit about Android and kind of the reality of where things are right now. So, obviously, everyone knows about iTunes, the App Store, about Apple and all the millions of apps out there, and all the millions of articles and sites and websites and TV, ads and interviews. Obviously, that's not where Android is. It may be at some point, and I think looking in the future, there's a big opportunity for it to get huge. And it's really good. I think everyone who's developing now, especially for Android, has a huge opportunity to get in early, like a lot of the iPhone app developers did, and made a lot of money and then moved off and retired. So some of the things that are kind of an issue right now is that there's not a lot of established methods for in-app marketing opportunities, not as much as there is for like iPhone developers. Jason talked a little bit about doing some of the cross-promotion with your more games or your more applications, which is a great method. There's also some areas that are tough with the pricing. So with like an iPhone app, you can do pricing models that involve microtransactions. It's rather new. We don't have the capability yet for Android. Also, they do different offerings. So there's companies like Tapjoy who do in-app services. So you can fill out a Netflix application and get virtual goods or get priced apps for free. That's something that we haven't seen yet. Probably the biggest limitation right now is the no monthly recurring charge. So I don't know if people know about MRC, but it's basic subscription model for mobile. And right now there's just officially the one-time purchase and also the free model. And another thing which may not be important for a lot of people, but if you don't know a lot of developers, you don't have a lot of friends in this with you, it's a little difficult to always get feedback on design, get feedback on how your product's progressing, whether it would be successful in market. So there's not, because of just the way that the Google Android market works, you don't have a lot of outlets for official feedback. So that's something that may be a limitation for some people. And as we all know right now, there's limited marketing vehicles. Can anyone name any sites, magazines that cater specifically to Android apps? Anyone read or? Android Guys. Do we have anyone from Android Guys here? No. Okay. So obviously this will change. We've talked a lot about how Android is going to be blowing up and it's going to be making a much bigger impact in the next 6 to 12 months and beyond, which means there's going to be a lot more exposure and a lot more outlets, which is good that everyone's getting in now. So if you I did a Google search today, looked up Android apps, also looked up Android games, came up maybe 1 or 2 pages of content that was actually interesting. Like page 2 had like Susie's top 15 Android apps from Amazon. So that tells you there's not a lot of dedication out there. So we have some sites here that we found that are doing reviews. You can submit reviews. You can talk to the people that run these sites. Some are bigger and cover multiple platforms. There's also, I believe it's pronounced Circuit. Anyone know about that? Right? So these aren't all, huge premium sites right now. A lot of these are pretty much homegrown. So what are some success factors for the Android market, for your app or your game? There's a few areas. Obviously, app quality. That's going to drive everything to do with your application's success. I'd like to say that it's great marketing people and beautiful taglines and lovely splash screens, but it's really the quality of the application in the end. And basically how you value and price it, that's where 90% of it is. Ratings and reviews. Obviously, we've seen the various and interesting horrors on iTunes with the review system and the rating system and the people who are panning their competitors' apps or buying reviews. It's all very interesting. But really, the ratings and reviews are also going to make a big impact on whether people are going to purchase your app and whether or not they may return it. And an interesting listing in Android market is, of course, the number of downloads. This will have an impact if you have a certain high enough amount of downloads. People will look at that as, wow, there's more people downloading this, it must be good, or there must be more quality in it. And that takes a while to build, obviously. We've touched on it before. So the 24-hour purchase return policy, it's been a challenging return policy, I think, for a lot of developers and publishers. Just in the fact that people can often absorb and basically chew on this content and utilize it, and then if they need to, return it and try something else. I've seen statistics that there's upwards of 30 to 60% churn on paid apps, and that's apps where people are returning them within 24 hours or they're no longer active users. Some of you may look at your own statistics and see that. Jason had a good point about ways of lessening that is having a demo version. So that way when people are coming and basically purchasing your paid version, they're much more likely to offer a better review and to stick with your application. So the question is piracy, which is huge, especially in the mobile space and with Android, like everywhere. And why would there be so much piracy if people can try out apps and return them? It's a great question, and I don't have an answer. We've seen it ourselves. We've sent letters cease and desist. We've tried to ferret out some of these places that have our apps for free, and we have been unsuccessful in either tracking them down or being able to do anything. If I haven't seen whether or not there's a less or more than other platforms of piracy, but I think that it's going to exist regardless, and I think it's going to vary based on the installed base and the usage levels. So this gentleman over here mentioned that if you are using features on the back end that must be connected with an application that's pirated, then perhaps having that component in there can stop piracy altogether. Okay, that's a very good point. The point is that by having a very lenient return policy, it allows you to be able to capture more potential customers who may not be your target demographic by having the ability to try out the application, where you still may be making all of your hardcore sales and from your target demographic. This way you might actually net in more people who may be interested in trying your app just because it's there and they can return it, and you may end up making a sale. The only danger to that might be if they try it and they're a fringe customer and it's just not for them, that they might possibly pan it or put a bad review. So these guys are just discussing whether or not it's a negligible cost to have people who are going to be returning your application on back-end services and broadband server load or whatever for whether or not that's significant or not when taking into account cost structure. Oh, that's an interesting concept. So the question or suggestion or marketing strategy, which is very good, is to allow someone to purchase the application or game for the first 24 hours, and then after that, sort of slow release features to keep them engaged or to keep them purchased. So looking at just some of the Android market opportunities, just some of the basic stuff that everyone can be aware of. There's some great articles on Android Guys. They have some great market maneuvering articles that have some very good basics, very good insight into what's going on in the market. Specifically, you can talk about Android download behavior. So what's really most effective in how people are basically getting to your app and purchasing it. And one of the things to talk about is obviously searching. People who search specifically for your application, that's your highest touch point, and that's where you're going to get the most sales, and that comes from reviews, word of mouth. It's very powerful. Then you go to the keyword search. So those are people who are just searching for a certain word, whether it's music game, puzzle game, many things like that. And that's where your 325 character description is huge. You want to make sure that you're using as much of that as possible. So you want to be talking about your application, what it is, also what it does, and also what it affects, so that you have a wider net for people that are searching. And the last version is the way people are getting apps is through obviously browsing categories. Hopefully, as the Android market increases, there'll be more categories. I think some of it's pretty limited, especially when you compare that to iTunes. And looking at some more lovely AdMob data here, got some AdMob representatives here. That's great. And looking at how people are discovering applications, there we go. We see that they're browsing through on their device. That's the highest. And then, of course, you have the typical searching for a type of app, word of mouth, and seeing it within other apps, some of the in-app advertising. In addition, you have some of the long-tail stuff on the internet, which is the blogging, news, articles, and other, which I'm not sure what that all is, but TV ads, that must be it. Looking at some of the extra stuff that you can do within the ad market. So one thing suggested is, what about getting a URL for your app, putting it in your app description, and then sending people to a web page that has video, it has big features, has testimonials, has reviews. What about taking people there and then getting them to learn more about your application and maybe become a repeat customer? The other thing you can do is try out new things. Resubmit your application, different price points. It may mess with your popularity ratings in the market, but you can try a lot of different things, a lot of different descriptions, even application names to figure out where your sweet spot is in reaching your demographic. Another thing you can do is cooperative initiatives, so online retail and customer databases. Get some other friends, get some other developers, create your own site. I mean, there's not that many out there. Create your own site and make it just a marketing vehicle for your applications. You can charge people from there. You can get customer information. And you can also use that to push with other sites. Say, we want to give away some free applications. Come to this site. We'll give you more exposure. And you can start building your own user groups. And of course, the market niches. So let's say someone built, I don't know, a yachting application. So that's going outside. So you're not just hitting Android users who may like yachting. What you do is you go to yachting sites, yachting magazines. So you basically turn it over. So what they'll do is they'll do a review of your application and maybe put it in print, put it on their website for all the huge yachting fans who may be Android users or may become Android users. All right, so we looked at market opportunities. What's outside Android market? Well, I'm sure we all know about these. Reviews, blogs, press releases, advertising. A lot of these are time-consuming, some are expensive, some may not be applicable to what you're doing. But all of them are worth a try and worth investing in, whether it's time to make your app successful. There's always time to send an email to someone at an Android site. There's always time to network, make friends, so that maybe the next app you have that comes out, someone else wants to review it right away. Maybe it's taking an extra time with a doing press outreach or doing a really cool tchotchke or a piece of swag and sending it to all the Android reviewers. Maybe it's going to like a site like IGN. Huge gaming site if you're making a game. Oh, sorry about that. GameSpot is also good. And what about maybe going to like Levi Buchanan, who does reviews for wireless there. Maybe they don't do that many Android games. Go to Levi, develop a relationship. Tell them how cool Android is. Tell them how great the device is. Start something new. Make a connection and make a difference for the community, but also your stuff. Promotions. There's so many sites that are just fledgling, just trying to get going. They want to tease their readers. They want to help their readers. They want to make their readers come back. Work with the editors. Work with the advertising people. You can work with them to do promotions on their site. Maybe you have a really cool game or app that involves models or something. Maybe what you do is whoever wins this promotion or plays this app and texts in or sends in, we put them in our next game or app. Something like that. As was mentioned several times, an app or game trailer is huge. Some of these YouTube trailers getting 20, 30, 40, 100,000 hits. You can't beat that. You can't beat that. Social media, we talked about that. And of course, never underestimate friends, family, colleagues. They can make a big difference in number of reviews, initial purchases, and initial feedback. And again, go after those niche markets. And if you don't want to do all that, Hands On Mobile has a developer network, which we've started over the last 6 months, where we work with all kinds of developers. It's called the Hands On Mobile Developer Network, HDN, and that's where we work with developers who have great ideas, really cool concepts. They can code, they can design, but they need some funding. They don't know how to market. They need marketing dollars. They need press. Maybe they don't have a lot of people to discuss their application or what needs updating. That's what we do. And we also, of course, do awards, trade shows. And it's a program that has been very successful for us so far, and we're looking for a lot more people to join. So thanks very much. Any questions? Well, the question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to have a relationship and to co-market, cross-market, promote with U.S. carrier operators, correct? Right. Well, for us, being a preferred partner with a lot of carriers in the U.S. market, it's a 10. It's a huge channel. It's a huge install base, and it's a big business, and it's very important to us. So he's asking how important, or have we
have you
experimented with 2D barcodes? Actually, we have a company in our building where we work that actually does that very thing. They do the barcodes on advertisements, on billboards, and print, and obviously websites doing the picture recognition and then taking them to a product site. I think it's very interesting. I haven't experimented with it personally, but I think that once you can do something like that and get a deep link into a product or app store, I think that'd be very, very compelling if you can do it at a cheap price. Another interesting question, price elasticity with Android games and apps. I think it's everywhere right now. I don't think there's the same sort of trending that you get with the iPhone applications of the 99 cents, $1.99, $4.99, $9.99s. I've seen it everywhere. I've seen it a lot more $2.99s, a lot more $3.99s, 99 cents, and a lot. I think there's predominance of free applications with a lot of paid sort of sprinkled in, kind of all over the place. I've yet to get a real handle on seeing where things sort of fall with, basically the success of where you're at with where the price point is. So I think playing around with that is definitely a big thing to get your feel. Okay, so the question is, do people compound expectation based on price points? And I think naturally yes, and I think there's a big element of people, especially with iPhone success, that just want everything at 99 cents or free. And anything more than that, they want to be wowed and awed and basically get almost a console-like experience maybe. There are people who I think respect and understand the art and what goes into making these, and they don't maybe complain about those things, or they don't mind paying a few dollars for some a great tool or a great fun experience that they can use for hours. But there's definitely a group of people that I think, whether it's through reviews or returns or just in general, just do not want to pay those kind of prices, which when you look at the traditional carrier model is very interesting, because there's carrier models over the last 5 years where people are paying $9.99, $12.99 a month for some applications or games. And we're not even talking MRC model here. So the question is, what do I see as the mobile trending of games in the future for mobile? Apps. Anything. Okay. Well, that's a very broad point, actually. What does the future hold? Well, it's obviously going to be more connected, more social, more meaningful. It's going to tie into other devices, cross-platforms. We're talking at the Verizon conference, and they're talking about having the connectedness of applications and games into vehicles, into appliances. Basically taking it everywhere and anywhere, and also making it more relevant at every level of your life, and stay connected. Okay, so I think what I get your question is how do we see new, more web-based, social-based gaming or application sharing with social graphs compared to old traditional sort of vertical software? I think that's absolutely the trend and where things are going. If you look at what the big, social gaming right now is huge. People probably heard of the Zyngas of the world, the Playfishes, Playdoms, millions and millions of installed base, millions of users. Getting into things like iPhone, integrating, like we were talking about Facebook Connect, creating more RPG type experiences or life experiences. Basically being able to make your life mobile, but also make it social and make it relevant. So that's where everyone is going to be pushing towards. I can speak from the marketing sense and from the asset sense about how effective it's been to be able to take content from one platform and be able to utilize it for another platform, and also keep community and keep the experience kind of together and progressive. It's very difficult. It's very difficult from an advertising and selling standpoint. From a community standpoint, we've been extremely effective with our Guitar Hero mobile community, and also with World Poker Tour, which has been one of the most successful connected web to wireless games ever. Even since like 2005 we had this. And that's taking everyone across every carrier. We have socket connections in Europe, and we had people playing on our flash-based game online, all playing at the same table and sharing their bankroll when they're on the go. So there's things you can do effectively, but it's a big investment. And I know that we've invested a lot in that infrastructure. So the question is, as a sort of purchase vehicle, as from a publisher-developer standpoint, would we want to, or would we be open to selling mobile applications or games through some, I wouldn't say traditional now, but sort of the online stores and online vehicles? I'd say absolutely. If there's, obviously the biggest issue with mobile is fragmentation. Delivery mechanisms, especially on traditional mobile brew and J2MEs, it's really difficult. But I think the more that these app stores and operating platforms become kind of more open and more open to being purchased, deeper links, being able to interact directly with the customer. So the question is, how crucial is web component when developing for wireless? From what standpoint? A user feature standpoint or a marketing standpoint, or? I don't think it's that important in some of the newer app stores. I think especially with iTunes, you got it all right there. That is your web page. That's where you can push. You can put a link in there to have people go to YouTube and check out your trailer. You can have all your marketing materials, your 5 screenshots. You're good. Same thing with Android Market. Until you get something, on the desktop. Same thing with App World. Same thing with all the app stores and everything coming out. But I think it's going to be less crucial going forward, just given sort of the openness of everything. So the question is using, or the comment is using the web to keep your app viral, keep your game viral, and maybe even keep it Which is an excellent point. I think you're seeing a ton of that with social gaming.
Yeah.
Or I know, yep, and like Digital Chocolate, I know have done some community things and adding more community and more social features. We've done that as well. And there's also ways to take IP, not only from Android to iPhone or to Verizon or to AT&T, but to take IP that's really a really great web-based game and bring it to DSi, PSP, Android. So there's a lot more opportunity for everyone, and for your great IP to become legendary. And on that note,
Thank you.
thanks. Thanks, everyone.